How's everyone doing today? So this is not streamed, this is actually going to be recorded so that I can kind of get my thoughts together in a way that makes sense without worrying about distractions. Especially since I didn't stream this. You know, I could end up spoiling myself on things I didn't get to yet. Because I definitely did not 100% the game. I definitely did not. I actually did a pretty bad job of it. Regardless, I am glad I didn't stream it. I was worried about Scandal after having played it. I think those fears were justified, but they were not realized. That was not a... that didn't end up being a problem. In fact, I was actually really happy with how it went for a few reasons, and I'll talk about that later as we get into the character tier list and the Persona tier list. So I guess just a general review, just broadly. Having played Persona 3 and I've not played Persona 5, but I've watched a full playthrough of it. 100% playthrough, so I know it pretty well. Even though I've never played it myself, I know it pretty well. I really liked the game. I really liked it. I think its plot was better than Persona 3's. I think its plot was better. I think its story was worse, but I think its plot was better. And you can say, well, how does that make sense? Well, in Persona 3, you may remember, I kept ragging on the game a little bit. And the reason I kept ragging on it is because it was very predictable. But I don't think that's to the game's demerit. I actually don't. I was able to figure out basically the entire plot of the game in the first 2 hours. Why? Because I know how Chekhov's gun works. And in that way, the game was a little bit amateurish in how it hid its clues, which is to say, they did not hide it. Not well. And so I was never surprised. In Persona 4, I really enjoyed the mystery, I really enjoyed the twists and the turns, and I really like how everything kind of comes together in the end. Because yes, I did get to Valentine's Day, so I do know who the real killer is. The way that the clues were seeded out through Persona 4, the way that it all came together was a lot more satisfying. And I would say you really didn't. You really did not have all of the clues to figure out who the true villain was. And so that's sort of the distinction, is that Persona 3 gives you all the clues you need to figure out what's going on from the get-go, which means that if you have an eye for those sorts of things, then you're going to pick up on all of it immediately. Persona 4 keeps its clues hidden. It doesn't just give you all the clues at the very beginning, which is fine, because it's a mystery you're supposed to figure out as you go. And so I am not at all bothered by that. But I did really enjoy it. It allowed me to get into the plot more. The other thing, and I've sort of discussed this a little bit, is I disliked how Persona 3 handled its antagonists. Where they don't get to do very much. I don't want to diminish them because I really do enjoy their characters, but they didn't get to do much. And then at the very end, it reveals all of their motivations and backstories in what is a very ham-fisted way. And I have some experience with this, where I wrote a novel, and similar to Persona 4, the villain was very much a puppet master who stayed into the background. And I realized, I thought I was like a third of the way through. It turns out I was a sixth of the way through. So it's finished now. I realized that the villain didn't get a chance to show off. You never really got a chance to get to know him, to figure out what his motivations were, what his histories were. And it was all just sort of dumped out in his final monologue, and I thought that was wrong. I thought that was a bad thing to do. I thought that was a crime against his character. And so I changed it. I changed the story, and I actually... over the course of a week, I invented 5 brand new characters and inserted them into the story. They had not existed for a moment prior to that. who existed solely just to show off how evil the villain was. And so that's how I solved that problem. In Persona 3, you get a sense like, yeah, okay, these are the bad guys, but you never get a good sense of their motivations or their backstories. And Ikutsuki is kind of the same way. It's sort of just like, he's good, and then he's bad. Why is he bad? Because he's freaking insane. And so yeah, you learn that Jin and evil Jesus, whose name I forget at this moment, you learn that they were experiment victims, and that's why they're so nihilistic, and that's why they sort of just want to die, because they have this tragic backstory behind them. You can know it logically, but you don't understand it. The game doesn't give you any room to empathize or sympathize or see things from their perspective, really at all, especially prior to the final act. And prior to the final act, you don't even get much of a sense. You don't get much of a sense. There's no real clues or hints like, oh, these guys were experimented on, and they were experimented on by Ikutsuki. They were, child slaves, and they went through all this tragic stuff. You just get the sense like, oh, they're jerks who have found some way to artificially awaken their personas, and now they're using that for evil purposes. In Persona 4, this is the thing, is that I'm floored. I got Adachi's social link to 2. I got him to rank 2, because I didn't know he was the final villain. Even just getting him to rank 2, I feel like I understood what his motivations were. Because, what were his motivations? He felt he was nihilistic. He was bored. He felt like he was being undervalued and underappreciated, and all of that shone through. And so, unlike with Ikutsuki, where when it ends, it's just like, well, where did this come from? I didn't see this coming at all. Not because it was a surprise, but because it wasn't hinted at all, or really given any clues to solve. With Adachi, even though it's hidden from you, and the clues that you need to put it together are hidden from you, once it's explained, it makes sense. And you can see where he's coming from, and you can see what his motivations are, and you can see that he's also, a sociopath. You don't empathize with him, you don't sympathize with him, but you understand why he thinks the way he does, and how he got to that point. So I really love the plot of Persona 4. I thought it was extremely well done. I love the characters. I probably prefer the main characters to Persona 4 to Persona 3. There are some exceptions. Like, my love for Yukari is well known and well documented. I thought she was an extraordinarily well done character. And I would still probably say that Yukari is a better character than any of the main characters in this game. Junpei has also grown on me a lot. I feel like I kind of dogged on him when I did the tier list the first time. But he and his arc with Chidori has really grown on me since then. It's really stuck with me in a way that I didn't expect. To the point that when I see Junpei showing up in other games, it makes me really happy. And I didn't expect to feel that way. I don't feel that way about Mitsuru or Fuka or Akechi, but Junpei grew on me in a way that I did not anticipate. Okay. But other than that, I really loved Chie. I really loved Yukiko. I really liked Yosuke. I really did. And we can get into why once I actually get to the tier list. But all in all, I think I probably preferred the characters in Persona 4 to Persona 3. All the main characters and all the social links combined. Because of course we remember. Right? We remember. We remember the moon and magician arcanas. I'm really bad with names, so I'm not using them. But we remember how that went. We remember how miserable it was to slog through those. I didn't feel that way about any of the social links in this game. Given I did not make progress in all of them, I'm actually really disappointed in how little I made. But I can say there were no social links in Persona 4 that annoyed me or that rubbed me the wrong way. I liked all the characters. I enjoyed all the characters. I enjoyed knowing them, getting to know them, and spending time with them without exception. Some more than others, but without exception. And so I would give that an edge. Why do I say that Persona 3 is the better story then? Actually, I also think Persona 3 is just a better game. I broadly do not like the new mechanics that they introduced in Persona 4. I'm not going to get too much into it because I feel it's kind of pointless to. But I prefer the Persona 3 combat. I prefer just about everything. I prefer the fusion mechanics. Or no, I don't. I prefer the mechanics in this game. But I dislike the shuffle mechanics. I dislike that they got rid of slash and bludgeoning and piercing. I thought that was a pointless change. I disliked it a lot. Persona 3 is a better story. Why? Well, that's because of the themes. It's because of the themes, and this is where we start getting into the meat of what I want to talk about. So, if you recall, this whole Persona journey has been about finding Christ, in essence, finding Christ in the Persona series. Specifically, answering the question of how did Persona 5 get so corrupt? How is it that the most popular entry in the Persona franchise, how does it come to have Satan himself as its protagonist? How do you get to that point? Persona 3 intrigued me, because I think the Persona series, realistically, are some of the best games ever made. Genuinely, they get the social aspect, they get the life sim aspect. I love life sim games. I also love RPGs. This is a life sim and it's an RPG. It's an extremely well-crafted game about time management. And so I think the Persona games are some of the best games ever made. But it doesn't matter if they're telling a corrupt story. So had it always been like that, or did something change? And so I went back to Persona 3, which intrigued me not only that, but because it had Christ himself as the final form of the protagonist. And so that says the goal of the protagonist in Persona 3 is to become the Messiah, is to become Savior, is to become Christ. That is the goal of the protagonist, is to become a hero, is to become someone who can save the world through sacrifice. And that's what you see in that game. That game it's a game about sacrifice. It's a game about, as I said before, it's a game about failure. It's a game about giving things up to achieve, I hate to say greater good, because I think that's such a wrong way of putting it. But it's about the necessity of sacrifice, and sacrificing personal goals and personal ambitions for the sake of higher goods. Let's say that, higher goods, not greater goods, higher goods. More for the sake of things that are actually important. Meanwhile, in Persona 5, the final form of the protagonist is Satanel, the adversary of God. So how is it that in Persona 3, your protagonist is the child of God, the son of God, but in Persona 5, you're the adversary of God? There's a flip there. And I wanted to figure out how it got there through Persona 4. And the answer is actually pretty clear, and the game tells you. The game straight up tells you. So in fact, if I can pull up the menu here, the listing, What are shadows in Persona? The first 10 simple, informative lectures about Jungian psychology. This game is based entirely on Jungian psychology. Now, given Jungian psychology, as it says, has always been a factor in the Persona series. Always. They've always been referencing things like shadow and ego. That's always been a part of the series. In fact, a core aspect of it is the idea of the manifestation of the truth, not the true self. Because I saved it in this game. I think there actually might be you can see it in the TV listing too. Yes, the beautiful yet strange masks. So in Persona 4, personas are masks, just like they are in Persona 3. In Persona 5, it's a manifestation of the true self. In Persona 5, the persona manifests when you take off the mask. But in Persona 4, as in Persona 3, they are still masks. So it still signals a tether to Persona 3. That those ideals of Persona 3 have not yet entirely been abandoned. So what happens instead? What is Persona 4 about? Persona 3 is about self-sacrifice. It's about coming to terms with failure and learning to right yourself with the world as it is, accepting the world as it is and your place within it. Persona 5 is about rejecting the world. It's about saying, if the world you're this way and the world is that way, so let's change the world. Because if you have this true self, and the achieving of your true self is the highest good. And so therefore, any systems in any society that prevents you from manifesting your true self, whatever your true self, quote unquote, is corrupt. It needs to be just totally expunged. Persona 3 is about balance. So in Persona 5, the way a persona is awakened is when someone has the courage to reveal their true self, quote unquote. When they strip off the masks and are ready to be just unabashedly themselves. In Persona 3, your persona is a mask that you use to face the world. And so you awaken a persona by gaining the strength you need to face the world. Which would necessarily require a firm sense of self. But at the same time, the persona is a mask. The persona is not yourself, it is rather a matrix of behaviors and habits that you have adopted in order that you may face the world and live in the world more effectively. In Persona 4, you awaken your persona by subsuming your shadow. And you're like, okay, so now we have to talk about Jungian psychology again. So in Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of yourself that you repress. It's the part of yourself that generally manifests as destructive desires, intrusive thoughts. It's generally, you could call it your evil self. That's a simplification, but I think that's fine. But it's the part of yourself that you despise. It's the part of yourself that you want to separate from. And so all Persona awakenings in Persona 4 go through the same process, where through magic, Persona magic, the shadow is separated from the self. Or I guess it's more accurate to say the shadow manifests itself independently. The person confronts their shadow in a direct and literal way. And then the person says, "You're not a part of me," speaking to their shadow. The shadow goes on a rampage. Once you tell it that it's not a part of you, it goes on a rampage. it has to be defeated. What does that represent? It represents how if you repress it, it's just going to get worse, not better. If you repress your shadow, those desires are going to get out and just rampage. Now that's not true. That's a false anthropology, and it's our first mistake, but let's ignore it for a while. We'll get back around to it. The shadow, is only defeated when the person says, I acknowledge you, I acknowledge these feelings, and I acknowledge that they are in fact a part of myself. And I'm not going to deny that part of myself. So, okay. That's what it means. Okay. So it's the subsuming of the shadow, which then makes it necessarily slightly different from what Jung was talking about. Jung put on this pedestal this idea that you should essentially fuse with your shadow. That the wholeness of the self, that the full manifestation of yourself is found in the ability to unite yourself with your shadow. And that's where I thought Persona 4 was going, but it's actually not entirely true. It's half true. You acknowledge that the feelings are a part of you. You acknowledge that they're there. You acknowledge that they are in fact a reflection of yourself. But then by acknowledging the problem, that's what gives you the ability to fix it. And I would say, if anything, that probably is the main theme of Persona 4, is admitting you have a problem. Which does put it strangely close to Persona 3, right? Where Persona 3 is all about this death to the self. Admitting that you are an incredibly flawed and imperfect person. You are a sinner in need of repentance, in need of forgiveness. That you, as you are now, are not good enough. And you need to change in order to face the world. And so it's similar to that in Persona 4, where in order to fix the problem, you admit that you have one. And that's what the shadows in Persona 4 represent. They represent your problems that you don't want to face. Your doubts, your fears, your corrupt desires. That's what they represent. That by admitting that they're a part of you, your shadow and your ego, your sense of self, become indistinguishable, and that creates a persona. Okay. So we sort of talked about the pros and cons of that, right? The pro is that it's still retaining that idea that you are not perfect, and that you need to change, and that you have problems that you need to fix. The con is that it's a false anthropology. Related to that, the fact that the Persona 3's protagonist is Christ himself is not accidental at all, clearly. The point is that you are imperfect the way that you are, and you need to change, and changing means changing who you are, sometimes on a fundamental level. You have this unattainable ideal, but joy is found in reaching ever more towards that ideal, unattainable though it may be. Persona 4 takes a slightly different approach. I would say, having played through the game, having gone through the social links, it probably does pretty fundamentally agree with Persona 5 in saying that, you know, you are perfect the way you are, and what you need to do is you need to manifest yourself outwardly. You need to be yourself. But Persona 4 recognizes that being yourself isn't a good idea until you know who you are. And that's actually not entirely a wrong thing. I believe it was either Aristotle or Plato who posited that there's no such thing as corrupt desire. That all human desires are, at their core, good and benevolent. However, they can manifest themselves in corrupt ways. And so, that doesn't have to be a full discussion here, but if you take that approach, then neither of them are exactly wrong, that your desires, in their proper order, are all good. But they can become disordered and manifest themselves in disordered ways. And that's what Persona 4 reminds me of, is, your desires are good, fundamentally, when you get down to them, if they can manifest themselves in disordered ways. And so in Persona 4, much like Persona 5, by the way, a lot of the social links, the theme is a return to the beginning. Naoto is an obvious example of this, where Naoto's whole social link is about reclaiming her childhood innocence. Rise leaves showbiz, and then at the end of it she goes back. Yukiko says, you know what, I don't want to run the Amagi Inn. I don't want that, and then in the end she comes around to wanting it again. Kanji's whole character arc is that when he was a kid, he was sort of effeminate, and so then he put on this macho persona to cover that up, and then at the end he returns back to where he started. And so it's about achieving this balance between the things about yourself that you don't want to face, and the part of yourself that you don't accept, and the part of yourself that you do, and finding balance between them. And realizing that the parts of yourself that you don't accept, they're not evil, they're not bad. They just need to be brought into proper order, and the question is what that proper order looks like. Now that all I like. And there's an additional element to that where the world that they go into isn't the dark hour, it's the world of the mind, and this is said explicitly. That when they go into the world where they can use their personas, that is the world of the human mind. And the whole point of the game is about achieving balance between those two realms. That there's a lot of going back and forth, and in the climax of the game, the whole point is that the mental world is bringing into the real world, threatening to just take the real world away, and so that people are just living in their heads. Which is a bad thing. You're not supposed to spend all day in La La Land. You're not supposed to spend all day in your head. You're not supposed to spend all your time just looking at yourself in the mirror and asking, who am I? At some point you need to go out and actually live in the world as it is. And that's what a lot of those social links are about. Coming to terms with yourself and how you are, but also coming to terms with the world as it is. Specifically, like, look at Naoto. She's transgender. She identifies as a boy for when you first meet her. But by the end of her social link, she reconciles herself with herself as a woman. She reconciles herself with the realities that she can't change. She's the most obvious example. That theme sort of plays in with a lot of them, but ultimately, just the fact that when the mental world creeps into the real world, it's fought back. It shows the necessity of that balance. It's also revealed by the fact that Persona 4 is, so far as I'm aware, the only Persona game, I shouldn't say the only one when I only know 3 and 5, but the only modern Persona game where the game does not end with the destruction of their personas. Persona 5 ends with the destruction of... I don't remember the name of the dungeon. But it ends with the destruction of the things which allow them to go into the dungeons. Persona 3 ends with the destruction of the Dark Hour, which means the end of Personas. Persona 4 doesn't. Why? Because Persona 4 doesn't use the Dark Hour, it uses the world of the human mind. The world of the human mind can't go away. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be in the background, waiting to rear its head again. You can't get rid of it. Instead, you just have to achieve this balance with it. Which is why in Persona 4, the power of Persona is not treated as a blessing or as a curse, it's just sort of fitting with the mystery motif. They are the guards at the wall. They are just the people who are watching the border between these two worlds, which both exist and which are both valuable in their own ways, but which are necessarily separate from one another, and which require reconciliation due to their differences. Persona 5 is very different. In fact, it's actually very funny. This is a realization I'm having as I'm speaking. In Persona 5, the protagonists of Persona 5 do the exact same thing that the villains do in Persona 4. The protagonists of Persona 5 are the villains of Persona 4. Where in Persona 4, people are put into the TVs. They're put into the world of the mind so that they can confront they are forced then by the villains to confront their shadows, then becoming better people and awakening their persona. That's what the protagonists of Persona 5 do. And I know that the mind palaces exist independently, but that's what they do. Is that they force themselves into a confrontation with the shadow of the people that they're dealing with. But instead of leading to a reconciliation with the shadow, they just destroy it and essentially brainwash the people, which is, you have to admit, a pretty creepy thing, even if they're evil. Like, oh yeah, we're just gonna brainwash people into being better. It's a little iffy there, bud. A little iffy. A little iffy. Especially since it really is this holier-than-thou attitude in Persona 5, where it's like, oh yeah, well, we have the power. We get to decide who gets to remain the same and who gets to be changed. We do. Why? You know, who died and made us God? Who cares? We have this power, so we're going to use it. However the hell we please. There really isn't a sense of duty or responsibility, it's just power. That's all it is. It's very Marxist in that way. It's all about power dynamics. So if Persona 4 is better in this way, thematically, than Persona 5, then how does one become the other? Well, it's actually not that complicated. Persona 4 puts at its sort of highest good, the good which is attempting to be achieved continually, the full manifestation of the self. And it posits that the self is neither good nor evil, it just is, man. It just is. And so you need to give people room to be themselves and to manifest themselves fully in the world. But then it also has this element of reconciliation with the real world. This, you know, like, take a shot every time you hear the word truth when you play Persona 4. It's continual. It says that there's such a thing as the wholeness of the self, the ego and the shadow that demand reconciliation. But not only do you need to reconcile yourself to yourself, you also need to reconcile yourself to the world. You can't change the world. The world is as it is, and you need to learn how to live in it. And so what you see on those two ends are Persona 3 and Persona 5. Persona 5 is you need to reconcile yourself to yourself, world be damned. Persona 3 is you need to reconcile yourself to the world, yourself be damned. Persona 4 says you need both. You need to reconcile yourself to yourself, but you also need to reconcile yourself to the world. Well, why? Why is it that you need to reconcile yourself to the world? In Persona 3, it's a sense of responsibility, for one. But it's also a sense of truth, that there is such a thing as truth, there is such a thing as morality, there is such a thing as duty. That you, in some way, have a duty to the world and to other people that you need to fulfill. I would say Persona 4 agrees with that. But it also has this additional element of, well, you reconcile yourself to the world because the world can't be changed. You live in the place where you are. You deal with it. The world is unfair and often cruel. And I'm not expecting you to change yourself. No. I'm not expecting you to change yourself to fit the world. That would be cruel. But I do want you to change your perspective. And that's what happens to all the characters. The characters do not change, they do not grow. Necessarily. I think there's probably one or two exceptions to that. But the characters don't change. The thing that changes is their perspective. That's why all of the characters, when they reach rank 10, most of them go back to where they started. They return to that phase of innocence, where they were just being themselves in an unabashed way. But at some point along the way, they got confused, or they forgot, or they got led astray, etc. So they returned to that original spot. But they also learned, like, hey, you know, some people are jerks, and that's okay. I don't need their approval. The world is as it is, and I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to learn to live in it. You see that with Naoto, where her social link more than anyone else's probably is about accepting the things you can't change. The fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's a kid, the fact that people won't take her seriously because of these reasons. Instead of getting all pissy about it, she learns to accept it. She learns to accept herself for who she is, which Persona 5 would agree with, but she also learns to accept the world as it is. That's where Persona 5 and Persona 4 differ. Persona 5 does not want you to respect the world for how it is, and wants you to change the world, and wants you to be a rebel. This is that there's such a thing as this wholeness of self, this manifestation of the self, and in order for that to be achieved, the world's got to take a back seat. If the world gets in your way, then the world's got to move. It's a very self-centered idea. But the mystery has been solved. The mystery has been solved. How did we get from Persona 3 to Persona 4 to Persona... How did we get from Persona 3 to Persona 5? Well, because we lost a sense of respect for truth. Truth broadly, but also specifically the truth of the world around us. A respect for reality, a respect for tradition, a respect for the way things are as they are. Not even a liking of it, but just a respect of it. We lost this sense of the world as something that cannot be changed. While at the same time, gaining this sense of the holiness of the self, the self-righteousness of our own egos. That the ultimate good, the highest good, the goal of every man is to attain a unity of self and a sense of unity. In Persona 3, the highest good was just to be the best person that you can be, and to live morally and righteously and justly. In Persona 4, the highest good is to live in accordance with your principles, even in a world that tries to stand against you. In Persona 5, it's just live accordance to your principles, and if the world gets in your way, screw them. That's the difference. So, I think that suffices for review and analysis. So, without further ado, if you would give me a moment. Let's do this. get to the tier list. Hell yeah. So actually, let's try and get some happier music, actually. This is stressing me out. There we go. Oh, it's almost over anyway. There we are. That's what we want. Music fittingly titled, I'll Face Myself. Okay. So, we still have the tier list up from last time. I debated changing it, but I think I actually am just going to keep it the way it is. And then we can get, like, when we're done, we can get a full comparison. So, also, this time around, I'm not going to do an analysis. Reason being, go figure, American white guy is not half as familiar with Japanese mythology as he is with Greek mythology. So a lot of these guys, I know some things about them, but I don't know enough about them to actually... I couldn't give you a treatise on them. Though, while we are on the screen, I do want to point out... So do you remember how I said... This is what I meant to say. So in Persona 4, you don't change, you don't develop, but you do grow. And so you see that in the Personas, how the Personas' designs at their core do not change as they ascend. They grow, but they fundamentally stay the same. Why? Why is it? Why is it that in Persona 3, some of these guys change just radically from one to another? Some of them don't, but some of them do. Why? Well, it's because they're changing, and they're developing, and they're becoming new people from who they were yesterday. In Persona 4, they're always the same person, they're just learning to manifest themselves in a more complete way. It's almost, it's the difference between like putty or clay that's being shaped and taken from its, you know, sort of lumpy mold into a vase or a bowl or a cup or something like that, versus like a tree. The tree is always a tree. It keeps growing, and in that sense it changes, but it's never anything different. It's never anything other than a tree, nor does it have the potential to be anything other than a tree. So all the personas are just sort of the same-ish. Why? Well, because the people are the same-ish, and the whole point of their characters is learning that they don't need to change. Learning that they are in a certain way. They're not perfect the way they are, but they're not in need of change, they're in need of growth. They don't need to change, they only need to change their perspective. That's the difference. Persona 3, they change, but in Persona 4, they just change their perspective, and so they sort of stay fundamentally the same. So Izanagi. I was actually going to put Izanagi in C, but I'll put him like here. I don't care for Izanagi. I think he's kind of boring. I really like Orpheus. I think Orpheus is like a great... Orpheus and Thanatos both are great protagonist personas. Izanagi I just don't vibe with. I find him boring. I don't see the appeal. This guy's not going on the list because I didn't get to see him in my playthrough. Go figure. Jiraiya. Jiraiya I actually like a lot. I'm gonna put Jiraiya near the top of B. I like his design, I like how it kind of looks like a smile, but it also looks like a boomerang. I think it's just really well done and really clever. I like how it's sort of frog-ish, which references its source material, Jiraiya, who's a frog ninja. I like its strange proportions. I think it makes it a lot more unique. Susanoo is boring. I don't like him very much. The Ascended form, whose name I forget, is better. But not much better. And they're all sort of the same, so I don't have much commentary. Tomoe. I love Tomoe, actually. I especially love that she's a Kill Bill reference. I don't like. It's not because I like that movie, I just think it's a really cool reference to make, given that Chie is a martial arts nerd. So I really like it. I think it's cool. Suzuka Gozen is easily S tier. I just adore it. It's just such a badass persona. It looks like Darth Vader. It's literally, it's samurai Kill Bill Darth Vader. It's just really cool. The final form gets a demerit. I think it's a bit busy. Makes it a little difficult to tell what's going on. Konohana Sakuya. Top of B. I think it's really cool. I don't have anything else to say. I do really like her design. I think she's just the perfect persona for Yukiko, this balance of beauty and elegance. Managing to communicate both her fire aspect and her healing aspect in a way that even Io, as much as I love Io, fails to do. It is in many ways the perfect persona. Doesn't mean it's my favorite, but it's in many ways the perfect persona. Amaterasu. I'm gonna put her up there. I really love that design. Yukiko was, I think, like the first person I got to max rank, so it was very rewarding. And the final one I'll put up here. I really like it, but like I said, it doesn't change that much. So I don't feel the need to add much commentary. I don't remember his name. Oh well. I definitely like him more than Polydeuces. I'll put him like there. I think I do prefer Castor more. I find it to be dull, kind of ugly, maybe not very well thought out. I also don't really understand Kanji's personas very much, because the whole point of his character, I'm not complaining necessarily, because I don't love the effeminate aspects of his character. But the fact that the whole point of his character is learning to embrace the more feminine side of himself, and then he gets this burly macho persona that remains burly macho, doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. Like I said, I don't hate the fact that those aspects of his character are minimized. I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. And honestly, these are probably all going to go on the same tier. Yeah, those... I don't have any particular preference between them. Himiko, I think, is really cool. I would put her all the way up in S tier. Near the end of S, I think I would prefer all these guys more. Facts. Maybe down here? Yeah, that seems more right. That seems more right to me. I really like her design. I like how she is able to get the... really emphasize the digital aspect. Himiko was a priestess with the ability to tell the future. So I like how her pose resembles a woman in prayer, but at the same time also a satellite dish. I think it's really well done. I just think it's a cool design. I do not vibe with her ascensions as much. I find it sort of inoffensive, her second one, but her last one is just hideous. No, I think I prefer Colonemi. I think I do just hate it. It removes all of the beauty and the grace from the persona, and it really doesn't fit Rise at all. I don't like it. Kentoki I find inoffensive. I'll put him in the middle of B. These other two, on the other hand, Kamui is hideous. And since I'm obliged to give commentary, I can appreciate that his commentary goes from, at first, his persona really endeavors to be human, and Kentoki was a human raised by bears, but then as he learns that he's a shadow and accepts that fact, they become more monstrous, but it's still hideous. Absolutely hideous. I think that's probably how it goes. They're so ugly. They're so ugly, it's not even funny. Hikuna? I like how small Hikuna is. Don't worry, he's not going in D tier, he's just being held there for the moment. I really like how tiny he is. I think it's really fitting. And I really enjoy how he interacts. I'll put him all the way up there. Then finally, as we near the end, Yamato Takeru. Yamato, I have no real opinion on. I think that's probably how it goes. I actually do like the design, and I like how it's a reference not only to Yamato, the figure from Japanese mythology who wielded grass cutter Kusanagi, but also a reference to the Yamato battleship. I think that's really cool. In fact, I'll put Yamato at the top of S. I'll do that, sure. I actually do think it's a really cool persona. And I think that's it. I don't think Marie's final form is on here. Which is disappointing, because I kind of feel it ought to be. But oh well. Not for me to say. It's not for me to say. Okay. So, excuse me, we'll move on to the next one. Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to remember. Alright, we're back. It's a reminder that Nozomi is so bad he gets his own tier. For those who forgot. Yeah. Yu Narakami. So, I have a confession to make. I started playing Arena Ultimax because it was on sale. Just happened to kind of work out that way. And I really like the way Yu is characterized in that, where he actually gets some personality. So I actually am gonna put him in B tier. Which I know is gonna seem so weird because he has no character at all, but I really like how he's characterized outside of Persona 4. Sort of canon personality. I think is a lot of fun. Anyway. There's Junpei on here. I want to give Junpei a rank up. I'm going to put Junpei at the top of B. See, he stuck with me a lot more than I thought he would. Yusuke? That feels right. That feels right. I liked Yusuke a lot. I thought he was a really good buddy character. And for a while, I preferred him over Junpei. But I'm sorry, Junpei has a lot more staying power than Yusuke does. Yusuke is really cool, and he's a really great comic relief character. But I don't feel like he has a lot of the heart of the other characters, and sometimes he feels like a little bit of a sideshow. But he is really fun. And I like him as a character, but after a certain point in the story, it felt like he lacked direction. Chie I really liked. I'm gonna put her at the top of C. What do you mean you really like her, then you put her at the top of C? I have similar opinions on her as I do on Yusuke. She was a really fun addition to the team. Like, really fun, but I felt like she was lacking in depth. Like, okay, I get it, you like to eat meat. But I do prefer her over Mitsuru, I'll admit. I did really enjoy her. She was one of the ones I just kept using continually. A lot of fun, but she lacked depth after a certain point. Kanji can go at the bottom of B. So I did really like Kanji. I did. I really like Kanji. I enjoyed his character arc. And it's one of the things that I kind of give Persona 4 credit for. It makes me really afraid for the remake, which is inevitable. Because, oh my god, they're gonna do Naoto and Kanji so dirty, aren't they? Kanji's whole thing... This is where we get back to Jungian psychology. Jung believed that homosexuality emerged from an inability to reconcile oneself to the... What's the word? An inability to reconcile oneself to the contrasexual. There we are. Found it. An inability to reconcile oneself to the contrasexual, meaning that everyone inside of them has masculine and feminine. And for men, it's sort of like a yin-yang, where in men there's this big blob of masculine, but then there's this little tiny piece of feminine, and in women it's the opposite. This big feminine, but then a little bit of masculine. And that little bit of... And that little bit, the small dot in the big blob, is called the contrasexual. And I suppose this is probably a good time to mention my opinions on Jung. I really like Jung. My opinion on Jung is that he's wrong about everything, but he's wrong in interesting ways. And he's wrong in ways that point you to the truth. I think if you read Jung, you'll be infinitely closer to the truth than if you read any modern psychological literature. But you'll be a lot farther from the truth than if you had just read, I don't know, Plato or Aristotle or the Bible. And so that's what Kanji is. Kanji is unable to reconcile himself with the contrasexual, and that manifests itself outwardly as homosexuality. Or homosexual desire, I should say. But when he reconciles himself to that, it's implied at least that he at least falls into this sort of bisexuality. And it's implied continually by the game that it is better for Kanji to be with a woman than it is for him to be with a man. That it is better, that it's more natural, that it's in keeping with natural law, and that his homosexual desires are inherently disordered. And so it in many ways affirms that. And I do actually really like Kanji. I really enjoy his character interactions. I like how even though his dungeon is one of the most risque ones, he's really just very innocent and childish. He's really fun. He's sort of like a little brother type of character, and I enjoyed his interactions. I enjoy these other characters more. Speaking of risque, let's change this music. That was another one of my frustrations. As you could tell, it was influenced by Jung and Freud because half of the dungeons had to do with weird sex stuff. Risei's dungeon genuinely made me uncomfortable. Specifically, that music did. Ugh. Anyway. Kanji's did too, but in different ways. Yukiko. Though I like her more than I like Chihiro. That's difficult. I'm gonna say less. Yukiko is precious and she must be protected at all costs. I really loved her character. I really love how her outward elegance is contrasted continually with an inner child. About how she loves to laugh and play and tease. And how she has this coldness, but also this tenderness, this contrast that even the game breaks up, that her name means snow, but she has fire powers, which is so ironic. But it's ironic on purpose because it contrasts her cold exterior with her tender heart. And broadly, she's fun and she's funny. And every moment with her was incredibly precious. Risei. I like her more than Aigis. I think that's where she goes. Risei was actually a lot of fun. She was actually a lot of fun, and I enjoyed her character a lot. I never found her annoying. I never found anything like that. I never even found her to be one note. I thought she was a very well done character. She just didn't click with me as much. And some of it has to do with the fact that her story revolved around this idea that there are multiple aspects of herself that she's having trouble reconciling. That she's worn so many hats that she's having trouble figuring out who she is. And her solution to that is just to not have a solution. Say like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I have these different outward faces, these different outward expressions. And none of them are the true me, but the true me is found in the unity of these roles. And I actually just don't think that's a good way to live. It's kind of fake. And I feel like it's even addressed in the game that it sort of prevents her from making genuine relationships and creates actual obstacles. But it's just kind of painted over because, oh, well, she's an idol, and because she's an idol, she can get away with it. Like, no, it's just sort of a superficial person. And I really enjoyed her, and I do actually... I don't want to undermine the fact that I actually do have a lot of... You know, like, she's in C rank, she's not in D or F. And even Keisuke, I like Keisuke, I just like everyone else more. In fact, there we go. I don't dislike her at all, it's just, I like everyone else on this list more. Teddy. He's not as bad as Pharos. I'm sorry, I really did just find him annoying, especially in the early half of the game, when he's the one that's leading, and he's the one that you're constantly hearing in your head. Oh my goodness. I'm somewhat proud of myself that just from those exclamations I was able to figure out who his voice actor is, because I watched, you know, Critical Role Season 2, Campaign 2. I was able to actually figure out who his voice actor was without looking it up. Oh my goodness, he's such an annoying character. I never came around to liking him, I always just thought he was obnoxious. I'm not going to go down too much this rabbit hole because I realize that a lot of the internet feels the same way as I do. But yeah, no, Teddy, no. No. Naoto? I think Naoto goes in S tier. I really love Naoto. First of all, just because I like that character archetype. You know, if you look at like the 5-man band, Naoto is very clearly the brains. And I've always really enjoyed those characters and that character archetype. I like how logical she is. I like that she always has a cool head. She uses a gun, so you know that's a pro. I can really relate to her whole drama of not being taken seriously. I like the fact that her social link was a puzzle, and you just got all these puzzles. And I also found her social link to be really refreshing, especially in this modern culture. For the record, I think I would, if I were doing this list in, you know, like 2012, or something, which I would have been in middle school at the time, but still, I would still probably rate her about this high, because I just really enjoy her character. And I enjoy stories where people wake up from an illusion, and that's what she does. She comes to terms with herself. She says, like, yeah, you know what, I'm a woman, and that's okay. Especially because I do relate to it. I've said this on the podcast before. If I were, 5 years younger, I definitely would have fallen into the whole trans craze. I definitely would have. I actually did struggle with gender dysphoria when I was in middle school. It was brief. It was very brief. But I did not feel like I was supposed to be a man. I felt like I would have been happier if I had been born a woman. I felt like my parents would have been happier if I had been born a woman. I did not feel like I was in touch with my masculinity, and so that's because, like, just for an example, when I toured colleges, I was majoring in psychology, which is a field dominated by women. I then changed my major to political science, which is a field dominated by women, with a minor in philosophy and religion, which is a field dominated by women. My favorite class was my English class, which is a field dominated by women. And I'm no longer insecure about that, for various reasons. Like, the best authors are men. The best psychologists are men. The most influential philosophers are men. So I'm no longer insecure about that. But when I was a kid, I felt insecure about that, especially because I've said this before. My family is hunting, fishing, and loving every day, and I'm very not. And so my model for masculinity was camo-wearing, gun-toting, beer-drinking, muddy boots, trekking through the woods, getting eaten up by mosquitoes. That was my baseline for masculinity. And I didn't relate to that. I couldn't relate to that. And so, especially because my parents thought I was going to be a girl before I was born, and I knew that. The doctor was wrong. I had a little bit of a complex about that. And so when I just said, well, you know what? I am a man, and so instead of complaining about it or wishing that things were different, I should just come to terms with it, and I did. And, 10 years later, my family will tell you, I am a masculine person. It's just that my masculinity manifests itself in subtle ways that a middle schooler would not recognize. A middle schooler wouldn't recognize a masculine temperament. A middle schooler wouldn't recognize the subtleties of masculinity and femininity. And so I relate to Naoto a lot, because Naoto is saying, well, look, all my interests are fundamentally masculine, or typically masculine. Same with me. My interest in English, the fact that I've always been hyper-focused on getting married and having a family, a lot of aspects of my personality and interests are typically feminine. But that doesn't make me a feminine person. Naoto has the same exposure, where she has typically male interest, and she learns to cope with the fact that that doesn't make her masculine. She's still a feminine person, and she's still a woman. And it's not just on the surface level, well, I can't change the fact that I'm a woman, so I shouldn't complain about it. It's learning to be comfortable in your womanhood. Learning to be comfortable for me in your manhood. And realizing that you are no less of a woman than anyone else just because for her you like guns and robots. Or for me, because you like philosophy and English and Shakespeare. And so I really like her character a lot, I relate to her a lot, and I found her social link to be extremely enjoyable. And it's really refreshing, it's not a story that would ever be told nowadays. Nanako is a kid. I like Nanako a lot, it's just, you know, she's a kid, she's cute. She's young, she's cute, she's not annoying at all, like Teddy. She's really fun, she's really funny, but the fact that she's a child means that her character doesn't get to have much depth. So yeah, I don't dislike her at all. It's just her character necessarily lacks depth by the fact that she's, you know, 8 years old. But she's cute and she's fun, and I liked having her around, and she adds a lot to the game just by her presence. Sort of like what I said now, it's just a continually refreshing presence, this continual exposure of childhood innocence. Like, yeah, that's nice, that's refreshing, that's sweet. Dojima. I confess, I actually never started Dojima's social link. Because I tried to start it once or twice and nothing happened, so I just assumed that he didn't have one. And so his rating has the biggest asterisk over it because I never fully exposed myself to his social link. I'm gonna put him up here. Because I do prefer him to all of these guys, but he was always a background character to me. And I liked him. I liked that he routinely had this cool head. He was just a cool guy, you know? He's the cool uncle. But also, he sort of got the short end of the stick because he got suckered into playing the role of the stupid adult who doesn't know what's going on. Which always happens in these, you know, like, urban fantasy teenage shows where they'll say, oh yeah, it's the adult, but the adult doesn't know anything. And so when the adult acts rationally and reasonably, it's portrayed as irrational and unreasonable. Not because it actually is, but because the adult doesn't have all the information. And even if you tried to explain it, he wouldn't believe you because it doesn't make any effing sense. So I really like Dojima, he got the short end of the stick. Sorry, bud. I don't remember his name. Dead girl's younger brother. Yeah, there feels about right. Saki Konishi's younger brother. I thought he was cool. I thought he was cool, but I never got attached to him. Found it to be kind of boring, honestly. Ko. I have to confess, Ko also has a huge asterisk over his head, because I did Daisuke. I did Daisuke's social link. I also did Yumi's social link, so you can tell which one I didn't do. So Ko never stood out to me, and I found him... Of all the characters in the game, he's probably the only one I would call annoying. I just never really parlayed with him. Never really appreciated him. This girl... I don't feel like she deserves to go in F, but I am going to put her at the bottom of D, because I don't really understand the point. I never really... I can't, like, look, I'm 21, never married. I cannot at all relate to her character or understand what she's going through. A lot of times her complaints... Either her complaints felt shallow, or it just sort of felt like, girl, you put yourself in an awful situation and you have no one to blame but yourself. I don't know what to do. No, I like Aegis more. I'll put him up near the top of D. I just found him dull. I did really enjoy his social link. I never got attached to him. I don't dislike him. Like I said, I like Keisuke. Never forget that I like Keisuke. I like Keisuke. It's just the same thing, I never got attached to him. I never really felt like his story was worth telling. Yumi. It also feels wrong to put Yumi this high. I'm not putting her that low. Yeah, I'll put her there. I don't want to put her that low because I do like her, but I like all these characters more. She could be kind of bitchy at times, but her story arc had a lot of heart in it, and I can appreciate that. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to say, I don't think. Marie. All the way up to S. I'd still prefer Yukari. She is so precious. Her character probably made me laugh more consistently than anyone else's. I loved her poetry. I thought that was a really fun aspect of her character. I liked that she was very honest. She was just a really fun character. I really enjoyed the role she played in the final act. It's just I have nothing bad to say about her. I really loved her. I thought she had a great social link. And also because her social link, probably more than anyone else's, reminded me of Persona 3's, where her social link, rather uniquely, is about coming to terms with failure. And coming to terms with the world as it is. So yeah, I have nothing bad to say. I really loved her character. She's cute, she's fun, she's funny. She made me laugh a lot, but she also pulled my heartstrings. Just a perfect character all around. I don't have anything super philosophical like Naoto, it's just personal preference. Ai Ebihara. I really liked Ai. Probably... Here, we'll do this. We'll do that. That feels right. I really liked her social link. I liked how it sort of reveals the strength of Persona 4 storytelling in that all the social links are sort of about a return to zero. Where, so for her, that means that her character she actually does go through a pretty dramatic change just because she's gotten so far off the track. She's gotten so far from who she really is and who she really wants to be, that coming back to zero is actually a really dramatic change for her. And I really like the execution of it. I really like the way that her character changes from this very vapid, bratty valley girl, and it develops into what is actually a strong and kind woman. I'm so upset I got her to rank 9. I got her to rank 9. I was so close. Pisses me off. But no, I really did love her story. Death. I have a feeling I did not get very far on her social link. I did really poorly on social links. I did really poorly. It's not even funny. I did so poorly. I really enjoyed the idea of her character, I just didn't get very far. I feel like she would probably be A or S tier, except I just didn't get that far. I just didn't get that far. I think she should be higher, but I just can't do it. Shu? I liked Shu. He was fun. I liked Shu. End of story. I could relate to him a little bit too, because he has that gifted kid syndrome, and I've probably had that at some point, but I've been in honors my whole life, so I've known a lot of kids like him. And so it was actually kind of almost cathartic in a way, because I felt like I was talking to people that I knew from my younger years. As if I could go back in time and talk to old friends of mine, knowing what I know now. It was actually a lot of fun. It was cathartic. Sayako is another one that went through a lot of dramatic change over the course of the story. I'm gonna put her down there. Definitely the beginning of her social link had me rattled. But that's the whole point, is that, like she goes through a fairly dramatic change. Because she's gotten so far off course, going back to zero actually does constitute a pretty major leap for her. And watching that go down, watching how turbulent things were, to the point you would almost accuse her of being bipolar, how turbulent her life was, her emotional state was, watching that all settle was really satisfying. I thought it was really well handled. Dog. Dog. Okay. This guy... I did like him, but I liked him as a villain, you know? I'll put him down here. I didn't love him. The thing is, he's obnoxious, but he was obnoxious on purpose, right? You're supposed to hate him. You're supposed to think he's a creep. You're not supposed to like him. And so in that way, I think it was really well done. But of course, that's the whole point, is you're not supposed to like him, so it'd be... Even though it was well executed, you know, the fact that you're supposed to hate him, like, yeah, they did a good job, but that also means he's stuck at the bottom of this list. Mayuki. I'm gonna put him at the bottom of C. I like what they did with his character. I don't think I ever really clicked with him on a personal level. But his role in the story I thought was filled very well, and it also helped that I was talking to him routinely because he had a portrait, right? So I was always trying to start his social link. Of course that didn't happen, but yeah, I like the role he played in the story. And then Adachi. Of course Adachi is on the way up here. I'm half kidding. I'm half kidding. I'm half kidding. Girish? Yeah, I think I do actually like Adachi more than Yukari. It's close, but I think I do. Okay. And I think his character is really well done, and like I said at the very start of the stream, this video, I guess I should say. His character traits were seeded out really well, so that even though I only got to Social Link 2 with him, I still feel like I understand him. I still feel like I understand him as a character, I understand his motivations, and that's a really cool experience to have. He was an extremely well-written character. He also just has very charismatic design. You actually can't dismiss the design when considering the rankings of these characters. Characters who have more plain designs are going to be put lower because they stand out less. But he has a very distinctive and recognizable design. I've seen people who love to Photoshop his face onto other characters, and by all means, go for it. I think it's hilarious. So let's see. Persona 3 has more characters. And the reason it has more characters is just because by default, in Persona 4, your teammates are social links. But in Persona 3, your teammates are not social links except for the females, except for the girls. And so Persona 3 just has more social links. Or it has the same number of social links total, but it has more characters, is what I should say. Especially since a lot of the villains of Persona 4 just are not... We're just soon-to-be allies, you know? So there's no Takechi, there's no Chidori. And they even have less party members. I think I was doing a count. If you include Shinji, there are 9 protagonists in Persona 3, but there are only 7 in Persona 4. So there are just less characters overall. Look at the party members. Let's see, Shinji... Let's see. Well, let's just look, right? Teddy is an F. That's gonna bring down everyone by a lot. Let's see. Agus is in D. Shinji and Mitsuru are in C. Konomaru doesn't count. He just doesn't get included in this. Ken and Junpei and Fuka are all in B. Akechi is in A and Yukari is in S. See, Naoto is in S, so it's the same number there. Yukiko is in A, so it's the same number of S and A's. I guess there are 2 B tiers. If you exclude Yu from this list, which I guess you should, even though... Do we exclude Yu? Because he has more of a personality than the Persona 3 protagonist. Yeah, we can exclude him. So 2 Bs versus 3, but there's also more. And then 2 Cs versus 1 C. Then there's an F. I guess it's actually about even. I don't know. Akihiko might be misranked, but I also don't know where else I would put him. So I think it also gets biased because I like Yukari more than I like all of the Persona 4 characters. I don't know. Naoto might be A tier as well. Naoto realistically might just be A. But oh well, I'm not going to think about it too much. That will put a rest to Persona games for a while. I already said I did technically buy Arena Ultimax. I'm not going to play the story mode on stream, but who knows? I might consider, especially if I have another friend who plays it, I might consider streaming some. I don't know. I don't actually play fighting games, so deeply insecure. That'll do it, I think. I actually do feel really accomplished. Because I feel like I got down to the mystery of this, while at the same time enjoying 2 genuinely great games. So I win. I just win. You know, I got to play 2 awesome games. I got to make content off of them. But I also have to analyze them and figure out where the Persona series went wrong. I would love to see the Persona series return back to its roots. And if a Persona 6 ever came out, which, you know, who knows? I would consider playing it. Otherwise, I think that'll do it. I've been having capture card issues lately, so... But I ordered a new one, so we should be able to continue our Fallout series. But I'm still looking into seeing, like, maybe streaming a different game on Tuesdays. I just haven't decided what that game is yet. Anyway, we'll see. Thank you all for watching. I will see you later.